Hey guys, welcome to another video on Marvel. This is going to be my thoughts on Thunderbolts after a bit of sort of reflection on the movie and things. Now, before I rebooted this channel, I must confess I was fully bought into the hype. But am I saying that that now means that Thunderbolts is not good, hence the title of this video? I'm saying that Thunderbolts has good elements. The movie has a lot of interesting elements or enticing elements, such as the fact that these characters are basically Marvel's answer to the Suicide Squad. They have interesting banter between them, and they have interesting backstories. Yelena Belova being the main character of the film, and the opening bit of when she's deciding is there something wrong with her, and she's having conversations with Red Guardian about how lonely she feels, and then the over-accompanying theme of the villain being based on depression and mental health, and that essentially being a lesser version of what Yelena Belova might be argued to be suffering from, because she's just going from killing to killing to killing, and that doesn't really have a life of her own. Other characters like John Walker are trying to be redeemed in this film, but the film has the crux of making sure you have to hate him. That's why I wish that they'd done the really big thing of making him be trained by Isaiah Bradley. See a video that I will link at the end. The point I'm trying to make is that John Walker is weighed down in this movie by the fact that the MCU needs you to hate him, because he is the dumb white man that was never qualified to take Steve Rogers' job. And yes, he did do stupid things, and yes, he did do something that would be against the Geneva Convention of War, in my opinion, in that he caved a man's skull in with Steve's shield and dishonoured Steve's legacy in that way. I'm not saying that moment is defendable. I'm just saying that John Walker as a soldier and as a character is redeemable, and it would be really interesting to see the character journey he could go on. Similarly with Bucky Barnes, there's so much depth and potential there with the Winter Soldier and all of his past trauma and past elements that we've seen in the MCU, as well as his relationship with Steve in the modern day, and grieving his friend that is now long since gone. There's so much interesting stuff there, but they don't even show his hellscape room in Bob's Void point of view. So overall, this film has really good elements. It tries to focus really well on character. The problem is the seriousness doesn't have the narrative and character depth that it needs to actually flow and make a point, because they have to keep going from action scene to action scene, and they have to find a reason for Bucky Barnes to join the Thunderbolts, because Bucky Barnes is now a congressman. Don't get me started on the logistical crisis that is, because there's no way in hell he would get past vetting, which they could have expanded on as to how he got there. Maybe had some flashbacks with Steve and that kind of thing, and given him more character depth, or even past flashbacks in Void's hellscape room kind of thing. But they didn't do that. They just said he's a congressman now with no realistic explanation and no real character depth, and they make a joke out of his past, which really ticks me off. So they have character depth here, even if Yelena, the best character depth they portray, again in a clunky way because they don't give it enough room to breathe. It's taken from Black Widow. It's not really expanded upon more than that movie. The character depth, the family dynamic with the Red Guardian, which I sort of did like between Yelena and him in this film, and again in Black Widow, but Black Widow was a travesty of a script and a travesty of a film, and Yelena's character keeps showing peeps of interesting elements, but they really don't give it room to breathe with the character depth they could have with an assassin of her caliber and her nature, especially grieving Nat and other things like that. They just don't give her the room to breathe that I think it could. Though this film sets a lot of that up. It sets up the Void, Bob, Sentry. I love the depiction of Sentry in this film. The sort of how he can go from being mentally stable to mentally unstable to in between, amnesia, victim to villain. That fluctuation, that juxtaposition, that dynamic was something I was like, damn, I really want to see more of this. Instead, what we get is just them breaking out of the vault with usual Marvel's humour, so the character depth they do kind of try and explore a relationship with each other is just, let's take the piss out of John Walker as the unit. Then they have to climb out of the vault, which I initially thought was funny, but on retrospect, and watching it again, I'm like, this is a really long, really long scene. And why is it so long? Just, dear God, why is it so long? The dialogue is just Marvel's humour after Marvel's humour. Red Guardian apparently spies on Val, but he looks exactly like him. That scene could have been improved by Red Guardian ripping off a mask or something. and showing his spy elements. Also, the government have their own cars. Why would they just call an Uber that happens to be Red Guardian's car service that they make a joke out of earlier in the film? Makes no sense, but you could have argued it. You could have literally argued it worked, although convenient. If Red Guardian actually used spy techniques to disguise his identity, but you can see it's Red Guardian, and also they would know that. They have government files. They would be watching him, surely, especially if she's trying to kill Yelena Belova in this film. Val isn't stupid, although she acts very stupid and is just like a quirky villain of the week, megalomaniacal government woman who's just like really, really Marvel's humour based whilst apparently trying to be threatening, and it doesn't mesh well, in my opinion. Interesting, like the interesting bits of this are Sentry. Sentry, I think, was nailed in this film, which is what would make me potentially want to rewatch it again to judge if I still think it's as good. The more times I rewatch Sentry's portrayal, the mental health depictions, the depression Yelena was going through, the character depth is there. Bucky Barnes, there's floods of character depth there. John Walker, there's floods of redeemable things you could do with him, but they just don't. None of that. It gets like the briefest of setups and doesn't have room to breathe between the humour, the fast-paced nature of moving from action scene to action scene, the fast-paced nature of giving Bucky Barnes his Winter Soldier-like aesthetic and moves, but also then he joins the team of the Thunderbolts after Val's aide gives him her number after she rejects him. And it's like, if you doubt Val, then obviously you would give Bucky your number, but also if you doubt Val, why did you save her from Sentry's clutches and then say, I want to raise so I can keep working for you? Why do you still work for the evil government bitch if you openly agree with Bucky that she's an evil government bitch? This doesn't make any sense. You could save her life because you don't want to watch a human die, and it's very, very moral and human and ethical for someone who's enlisted the help of Bucky Barnes, a redeemable, heroic character after going through a horrible past, tortured by Hydra, to, stop her boss against her, against her scared judgment. She's still enlisted Bucky to do this and given him the in and the ability to track her phone, that kind of thing. That made sense, and then her being ethical as a result of this character development and saving Val from Sentry makes sense. But begging for a raise so that she can keep an eye on Val, she's not a spy. She doesn't have any protection from Val or someone at Val's level. She knows she can kill people. Surely the simplest way would be to not ask for a raise, but leave your employable post and say that I have enough information on you to blackmail you with how close I was, and then use Bucky as a protection, like live with Bucky or have Bucky set you up a new identity because it's Bucky. He has enough clandestine ways of doing so. He was hiding from the entire world and the entire government whilst he was on the run for specifically bombing the UN and had many, many go bags in like Germany and things when Steve found him. So it's not as if he couldn't have hid her and she couldn't have lived a relatively normal life away from Val's clutches, and she didn't have to keep working for the evil bitch she openly acknowledged was an evil bitch with absolutely no moral character. That didn't make sense as a plot point. I'm really sorry I keep harping on this, but it annoyed me because there was an easy way out. And then you got the actual fight with Sentry when he becomes fully villainous and his mental health becomes the worst. Then you have like the Void Thanos level thing happening, and I like the juxtaposition, the mirror of who Sentry is. So this is the bit that I enjoyed, the mental health side of things, but they don't explore the depth, the range, the character depth, the analytical depth, the struggle. They could have slowed this way down into two parts of a movie. Part 2 being Sentry, Part 1 being the guy stuck in the vault having to reluctantly bond, and then Bucky joins the team when he might come to shut down Walker, but Walker explains to him perhaps how bad things are. But if you had most of the movie them being stuck in the vault, and then part 2 of Thunderbolts was actually a full-on Sentry, and we get into the mental health of each character, and everyone has a Void room, which was one thing they were going to do. They were going to have everyone have a Void room in the Void bubble thing. The mechanics of how that works, I will try and understand, but I don't really get that. But anyway, they were going to do that. They were going to have Bucky and everyone have a room. Why did they cut that? Why did they cut the serious depth? The more character depth moments you could have added to the character depth you sprinkled in and gave me hope here, the better, but you didn't do that, did you? That's what makes rewatching this film feel like a chore, but it also makes me want to rewatch the film because I want to see whether I'm being overly harsh. But the more I watch it, the more I'm like, no, there are good moments, but the moments are squandered, the depth isn't there. The room to breathe isn't there, and I like what they were going with Sentry. I like what they were going with Yelena's depression. I like what they were going with Bucky's sort of barely having a life and trying to find some kind of place to fit whilst trying to flirt with someone. I don't understand how he's a congressman, but I like the kind of seeds they sowed within him, within the context of him being a congressman, even though him being a congressman is so fucking dumb. It's just baffling, man, and that's why my script and my dialogues. That's why me speaking out my script is so disjointed, because the more I think about this film, the more it feels disjointed, and just feels like it goes from hapless action scene to hapless action scene, to then actual character moment and setup and depth. But we go back to annoying John Walker, and we can't have him be a kind man. He gets a void room, but it's just how he's lamenting the past, and wants to be Captain America again, and feels sorry that his wife left him, which I suppose you could argue that that's some attempt at character death, but we've got to shit on how bad John Walker is as a father at the same time. There's so much they could be doing with John that they don't do. And as I say, I don't argue he's a fully redeemable character, but that's why you should try to redeem him. That's the character depth you can get from that. Have him be trained by Isaiah Bradley, have him have his own film, and try and fight against Val. At least they didn't do what they were originally planning to do, which was have him be the villain of the movie and betray Val and have Hulk blood in him similar to Ross. Apparently that was something that the director actually talked about in an interview. There are articles about it. Go and Google it if you don't believe me. In other words, it was basically just going to be another Brave New World, but with John Walker acting as a Hulk, because you can get Hulk from everything now. Or a rage-based, super soldier serum-fueled idiot that would eventually turn into a Hulk. It's because, you know, more Hulks is what the MCU needs. But it's just... They didn't do that, thank God, but also what they did was set up character and have the depth of that character snatched away within the course of the film. You also have 3 super soldiers on that team, which is insane to me. You have Bucky, you have Red Guardian, and you have John Walker, and they're struggling to lift some walls off some civilians at points. And I'm like, I get that they couldn't beat Sentry, that's why they had to beat him the mental health way. That is the interesting bit. Them going into the void, the other elements took me out of the film before it, so I was kind of checked out and switched off upon thinking about it. I will admit to fully being sucked into the hype the first time I made a video on this, but in retrospect, the more I think about it, the more I analyse it, the more I think about what I liked about that film. There was good elements there, the mental health stuff could have been really interesting, but they don't give it the character depth, the memories to breathe that it needs, and I keep saying that because I want other people to understand. I don't hate the film, the potential of the film was there, and I actually really liked what I thought they were going to do with it, especially when I saw Sentry in the trailers, but they squandered the potential they had. The trailers, I felt, were just misleading, because they obviously had Taskmaster killed and did her dirty. Although I don't really like Taskmaster in this iteration, in the MCU iteration, so frankly I don't really care. But the trailers were so misleading because it was just all Taskmaster scenes that they took out. And there's so many scenes you see in the trailer that aren't actually in the movie, so trailers cannot be trusted these days. But the Sentry stuff in the trailer made me think this could actually have a glimmer of seriousness to it, and it did, but the glimmer was short-lived and wasn't given the room to breathe.